What can the Pacers learn from their lineups with their two wingiest players, Jordan Nwora and Oshae Brissett? And what does it mean for the future of the Pacers team building plans? Will Furr is going to join us and dive into that today. Plus, which players fit the Pacers identity best and which young guys can step up in that way? And when is the best time for the Pacers to make the Bucks version of the Jrue Holiday trade? We'll get to all of that today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we are diving into a topic I think is really interesting for the future of this Pacers team, and that is lineups with Jordan Nwora and Oshae Brissett. Why those two specifically? Well, they're bigger than all the Pacers guards, and they're smaller than all the Pacers bigs. They are true modern NBA-sized wing/power forwards in a way the Pacers haven't had much in the last couple of years. What do lineups with both of them tell us about their skill set, how they fit with the Pacers and their identity, and how the Pacers need to build their team long-term? Will Furr, formerly of 8.9 Seconds and The Fieldhouse, two of the greatest Pacers blogs for your Pacers of all time, will join us to talk about that, plus the Pacers' identity and who fits it among the young guys on this team with 6 games left, and when's the best time for the Pacers to make their version of the Bucks Jrue Holiday trade, going all in on a guy who can push them over the top. We'll get to all that today on Locked On Pacers with Will Furr. Let's do it. We are now joined by Will Furr, one of the legends of the OG 8.9 Seconds days with the Fieldhouse in the golden era as well. We've got a lot of fun stuff to get to between the Jordan Nwora, Oshae Brissett duo, the identity of this team and what it means for their offseason, and the Pacers Bucks tonight. I got to ask a different question about the Bucks than last time, so we'll dive into something about that. Will, how are you? You don't write anymore, so I don't get to chat with you about the Pacers as much.
Yeah, it's been too long, man. I'm doing well. How are things? I know you're working for like 8 different places about the Pacers now.
Eight's the perfect number I have determined at this point of the season. The duo we're highlighting today, Jordan Nwora and Oshae Brissett, might seem obscure, but last week I did Halliburton Mathurin for obvious reasons, potentially the duo. I also want to do Jackson Smith at some point because that double big combo is potentially important to their strategizing of the summer. Nwora and Brissett are the only two dudes between guard size and center size on the entire Pacers roster. I kind of in my head constitute Duarte and Nesmith as wings. Maybe that's just because my brain forces me to, covering this team and the size of players that they have. But Nesmith can kind of guard some of them. Duarte has struggled to do so this year. These two, in my head, seem noteworthy for the Pacers and their evaluation of how much they need forwards, what type of forwards they need, etc., because they're the only guys you can plug into a lineup that are that size. And so, individually, like their offense is really good when just Nwora's out there, and their defense is pretty good when just Brissett's out there. But have they played with two big dudes together on the wing? The answer is yes, Will. Unfortunately, the answer is yes, because those 77 minutes have been terrible. The Pacers defense, really good, really good. Let's start with the really good thing. 112.7 defensive rating on the dot. NBA.com's estimation might be a little different from that. The offense, well, yikes. 161 points on 161 possessions. That is a 100 offensive rating. That would be the worst in the NBA by almost 10 points per 100 possessions. What do you think about maybe not that duo long-term, but conceptually the idea of the Pacers exploring those wing groups? And do you feel like those numbers are reflective of what they've been so far?
Well, I definitely think the uptick in defense is real. When you're playing Aaron Nesmith or Andrew Nembhard or Chris Duarte as a power forward, you're only going to get so far on the defensive end. So having two guys, not just one, but two guys who are forward sized, who can theoretically at least guard forward sized people, it's going to help the team regardless. Nwora's not some great shakes defensively. He's actually been much better on that end than I anticipated. From what I had heard from and seen from Bucks Twitter, he's been adequate, which was more than Bucks Twitter thought he was.
They're tossing him on Luka, and I'm kind of like, yeah, that's fine. All right.
Yeah, he did a good job. He did a good job last night. But just it really highlights the dearth of forwards on this team. And it is insane to me that Brissett didn't play for what feels like 3/4 of the year. That's a topic for another day. But I think the defense is real. I think having at least one, if not two, forward-sized guys alongside Turner is obviously going to be a positive thing, especially when they're forward-sized and not center-sized. The Pacers went from one extreme of having Sabonis to the other extreme of having, four guys who were 6'4", 6'5". And it took Carlisle a little bit, and it took this trade, but I think the defense is definitely real. The offense is just gross. It's not good.
It's funny looking at the extremes. You could even say they did that this season because Jalen Smith was the 4 for whatever it was, 25 games to start this season, and I get why they did that, but that is not the right choice. The thing about it is less about the skills of Nwora and Brissett specifically, although I have been impressed with Nwora, and I, like you, have been a fan of Brissett the whole time he's here, but just more so about like what you said. Like they don't have dudes that size. Like since Thad Young, even that was 5 years ago now. When did he leave? 2018 summer. I mean, they have had McDermott is that size technically. I don't think anyone really thinks of him as like this big wing. Man, they have not had very many guys of that size who are like good enough to be on the floor. That's why Brissett, like he was on 10 days and then immediately they started him in playing games because he was so valuable. That Bjork Grenier, right? Like having players that size is valuable. And so seeing how they can boost this team, I think, is important, even if it's not about those two specifically being on the team long term. I mean, Nwora's under contract next year, but Brissett isn't. They don't have a lot of roster spots. Like they could bring him back, but then it's going to complicate even more things. I don't want to talk about that right this second, but I do think it's interesting to just explore what having, not modern size necessarily, but the Raptors certainly think so. Like their whole team's that size, like of what that means for this team. And the other clouding part of this for me is I wanted to dive in and see, well, their offense has been terrible, right? When they're both out there. But how have they done with those two out there alongside Tyrese Halliburton? Because that's key to know. How does Halliburton, can he create enough on his own to buoy these two in groups? Well, you know how many minutes those two together have played with Halliburton this season?
How many, please?
The answer is 0. It has not happened at all. So, unfortunately, that data point hasn't happened. When Halliburton returned this past weekend, Brissett didn't play, hardly played. He missed the 6 games before that, so his overlap with Nwora in general hasn't been that big. It's only like a 10 or 11 game sample, and when Nwora plays, he's usually with the second unit instead of Brissett. There's a lot of layers to peel back on why it hasn't happened, but that's part of why their offensive rating is 100, because they haven't played with the dude who's like an automatic average offense floor. But at the same time, I would like to know that data point as well, which that's kind of a bummer. But at the same time, I think learning that, hey, two dudes this size can buoy your defense alone is still valuable for this team.
Yeah, I'd assume they'd play all their minutes with either Nembhard or TJ McConnell. Obviously, McConnell, who's been a revelation from 3 this year. So happy for him, but he still only takes like 1 a game. Not great for spacing or creation, and Nembhard is still figuring the game out. The entire Pacers offense, as you mentioned, when it doesn't have Halliburton, it does not look. It's not great, Bob.
Only 2 minutes with Turner, so it's not like their defensive numbers are inflated by the backstop. 75 out of 77 minutes without him. They defended pretty well in those 2 minutes, but I'm not going to have any sort of stock in that. But yeah, it's just interesting to look at all these combos and kind of go, oh, okay, that's interesting. That isn't interesting, whatever. Ironically, Will, you mentioned the point guard part of it. Their most played lineup together, the point guard, is actually George Hill. Like that is what I know. You can't get a lot of information from that specifically, but that group scored 29 points on 29 possessions, which is like 112 offensive rating. Like that's pretty good. So maybe that, I don't know, maybe you can hang your hat on some things, but this is an overwhelmingly small sample. A lot of the groups they've been with have had Jalen Smith as the big and McConnell as the 1. And most of them have just kind of been stuck in the mud offensively because it's not a lot of shooting in general. Like Nwora, I always say the N just because of the N at the end of his first name. I got to get better about that. In general, you only have one quality shooter with those groups, unless your Buddy Hield's with the second unit for the rest of the season thing continues and he returns to the lineup. We'll see. But that's going to make it hard to have a solid offense in general. As good as McConnell's improvement has been, and Smith can occasionally make them, it's not a lot of threats, right? You're relying a lot on your point guard to create shots from anywhere on the floor, unless Nwora is truly this pick and roll maestro like he showed in Atlanta. So that's part of it as well, is they just haven't played with Haliburton, and the groups they're with don't have the requisite shooting to really elevate them, even though the defense has been good.
Yeah, obviously Brissett is a very dependent offensive player. He can hit an open three. He can catch and bounce and take it to the rim on a bad closeout. I don't know about Nwora. He did the 25 or 28 point quarter, whatever it was, really threw me for a loop. You don't expect that, but I still think he's more of a dependent scorer on the whole too. And when you just don't have the offensive engine, and then you're playing with Jalen Smith, who's also a dependent scorer, or Isaiah Jackson, who is a far more dependent scorer than either of them, like you said, things are going to get sticky and the ball kind of dies. And the 100 offensive rating is not a surprise with those lineups.
My favorite group, just numerically, it's only played against Charlotte. It played for 8.5 minutes. McConnell, Nwora, Brissett, Jackson, and Smith, as big as possible. Their defense was ridiculous in those 8.5 minutes. They gave up 13 points in 8 minutes on 20 possessions. So that's a defensive rating of about 65. That'll work. That'll do it. In general, that's not sustainable, and they were playing the Hornets. But I think conceptually, the blueprint is there that like size alone can help your defense. That would be my takeaway from the numbers. But at the same time, if they have very few offensive skills, or the word you're using that I like, to they're kind of dependent on others to get set up, they need to play with a creator, or specifically Tyrese Haliburton, for it to really mesh with what the Pacers are right now.
Yeah.
Hey guys, one short little break here so I can talk to you about Ultimate Pro Basketball GM, the coolest game I've played in a long time. I've always thought I could be a great GM, as you know from listening to me on this show. As it turns out, it's real hard. If you've had the same thought and have thought about managing your own basketball franchise, go ahead and download Ultimate Pro Basketball GM right now, the game that allows you to manage every strategic aspect of your franchise, playing through seasons, leading your team and fans to glory, building a dynasty, dealing with challenging personalities, hiring the right staff, trading and training players, making draft picks, just navigating your franchise through everything. All this in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Pro Basketball GM, completely free, playable offline, on the go, as you want, when you want. Check it out. The Ultimate Pro Basketball GM Locked On group has been really fun. Pat, the designer, the Locked On Bulls host, is kicking everybody's butt. We've had a lot of smack talk. You can do it with your friends. It's super fun. Locked On Pacers listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in the game store. So make sure to check it out. To download the game, just visit probasketballgm.com, scan the code on your screen on YouTube, or look it up in the app stores. That's probasketballgm.com. Ultimate Basketball GM. Start your dynasty today. I want to pivot now because we just watched the Pacers play a starting lineup of all 24 and younger dudes, and their bench, they played with the other 2 young dudes they have available, as well as 2 veterans, because you literally can't play a 7-man rotation and not have dudes get really muscle sore the next day. Younger stuff coming for the Pacers. We'll see if Haliburton, Turner, or Hield play again this season or not.
Kind of doubt it.
Yeah,
Buddy might, because I know
Buddy
he's crazy about it.
Again. Buddy, I think, might play again. I don't know about the other 2. They have a winning record when Turner and Haliburton overlap this season. Like it's risky, although they do play some tough opponents either way. I think you're going to see a lot more of the younger guys. I don't think that's a surprise. They did it last year. If you look at their last 7, 8 games, whatever, it's like 30 minutes of Dwayne Washington and Terry Taylor, and
right.
Brown didn't play. The part that I'm intrigued by this year compared to last year is last year it was clear that they were headed for more change with their team, and the Brogdon trade was going to happen. They had this high draft pick. This year, they have enough of the core in place that, to me, you kind of know what the identity of the team is that you didn't last year at all. Like, that was actually a big thing for me, was Karis LeVert and Malcolm Brogdon both said something totally different when I asked them what the identity of the team is. This year, it's obvious what they want to do, how they want to do it, play fast, get the ball out of the crowd, run it up the floor, 5-on-4, even after makes. Our offense is going to be so fast and random you can't stop it. That is what I think is the interesting part, beyond talent and growth of these last 6 games, is can anybody step up or shine in a way where they fit that identity or stand out in that speed, or can manufacture it in a way that when Tyrese Haliburton isn't out there, makes it clear that they would fit with the next version of this team. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is when I was talking to someone who covers the Nuggets, we did a whole podcast about team building for this, and they were like, yeah, drafting players and acquiring players who fit with the Nuggets identity that Jokic can operate and create has what's made them grow so effectively. And now they're the 1 seed in the West. So like that is something new for the Pacers to consider in team building that wasn't the case last summer. Is adding players is good, obviously, but adding players specifically who fit with Halliburton and their identity is important. So for you, Will, when you look kind of at how the Pacers will play in these last 6 games, do you feel like if anyone is speeding things up or is fitting in a certain frame of reference or identity, would that like boost their chances of being a long-term piece for you? How are you kind of viewing that down the stretch?
As far as boosting the chances long-term, I think Nwora's got the biggest opportunity. He's got to show that he can fit into some of it. Obviously, being able to show he would fit in with Halliburton would be great. But he's got to show quick decision-making and the quickness that the Pacers want to run with. Like you mentioned, running even on makes. And this is something that's driven me nuts about Nembhard and Mathurin all year, is they both can get so deliberate. They want to walk the ball and they want to assess. And I know as rookies, they may not see the court the same way, and that type of thing will come. But Nwora does some of that too. And that's going to be a pivot point on the Pacers' identity, is having guys that can make quick decisions, either go, shoot, or pass. And I think even without Halliburton, even without Turner, that's something that Carlisle can look for. That's something he can push is, hey, this is your audition. This is your chance. I want to see you make quick decisions. I want to see you move. And he's a big one. Obviously Mathurin's a part of the future. There's no doubt there. I think he's an all-star, and I think that's going to be in his future. But having him in the starting lineup, I think that's something he really needs to focus on, is being quicker in his decisions. And I'm watching for that over these final few games to see if that's something that's even being worked on. I have no idea what's happening behind the scenes, obviously. But it's one thing for him to catch it in the second unit and size up and think about it, and maybe dribble a couple times, catch a pick and roll, try to get a mismatch, whatever he does. In the starting lineup, he's not going to have mismatches. He's going to be going against Jimmy Butler or Chris Middleton or Jrue Holiday tonight. If Milwaukee's playing their dudes, he's going to have to move quick. And that's what I'm watching for. Guys who can make that quick decision. Even these last few games, even if it's the wrong one, can you make the decision?
Agreed. Like Buddy Hield, the decision is the same one every time, but he gets the shot up really fast. Like that's good, right? I'll be curious with the Bucks if they play their guys. They're on a back-to-back, and I think the Celtics is their second game, which is just a wee bit more important for their season at this stage. So we'll see what they prioritize. Nwora is an interesting shout. Like Carlisle has been talking about with him, getting him some of those playmaking opportunities, and I always have said, like, I don't think that's like run pick and rolls, but at the same time, he kind of has been doing that a few times these last few games, which is surprising. Yeah. But with rookies, like they're coming from college to the pros, like you're kind of molding them to your identity. They've never played in the NBA. Nwora went from the Bucks, who play really slow, and his job was stand over there and don't move unless all other 4 guys go to the other side of the court, and then come up a little bit and then go back. Like it's way different processing for him. So not only for me is it making quicker decisions with him, but just seeing him like completely change that mindset and that speed. That's hard, right? So I'll be curious to see how he can do that. And agreed on I think the quicker decision making extends to everybody basically. Like they have a lot of guys who have either played in slower systems before or are learning to play faster. Isaiah Jackson makes quick decisions. I think like when he screens, he immediately sprints to the rim, which is like 90% of his offensive role. No concerns there, but in general, there's not a single guy that I would point to and say, Brissett's pretty good at quicker decisions too. But of the guys that are going to be playing a lot that are young, I think all of them can show a little bit more in that department. Mathurin's interesting. Like if it could somehow be drilled into his head every time he catches the ball that there's 5 seconds left on the shot clock, then he'd be awesome at the identity part of this, because he, in those situations, right away on the floor, I'm trying to get around this guy, trying to get to my spot. Like when he sizes guys up, he still scores. He's a good isolation player, especially for a rookie. He gets to the line, but he makes the quick decisions when the shot clock's winding down. Like somehow if that could be more habitual or shown more in these games, even if it's like playmaking reps, that would be very interesting to me. I'll be curious if anybody stands out. Yeah, skill growth and Rick Carlisle's words, like adding responsibilities, all that is important and will be beneficial for these guys long term, but also for the team that is going to have by default, by having 5 draft picks and a ton of cap space and only 3 free agents, a very, very busy offseason full of many decisions. Evaluating these guys and their long-term fit with the team is just as important as skill growth.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of hard choices this offseason. And I know they signed Jalen Smith to a multi-year deal. I know Nwora's got more than a year. He'll be under contract next year somewhere, if not here. But I do think these guys are really competing over these last few games to show like they want to be on the Pacers and they want to have a role. Because let's face it, especially guys like Nwora and Jalen Smith, if they can't eke out a role on the Pacers, they're going to struggle to go elsewhere, to be traded elsewhere into a role and not be a 12th, 13th guy. So these are really big games for them. And I think, like you said, the additional responsibility will be really interesting to see if they can do anything with that, if they can make use of that, like Nwora did the other day.
Yeah, I agree. And that is the subtext of all this, that I was reading through like Carlisle's comments about all this stuff before and after the game they just played. Like they're mixing a new lineup and new groups. Before, like a month ago, he mentioned that they had a practice where like for 2 minutes they ran Mathurin at point guard. Like all this stuff is really important. And so as they come into this offseason, all this information will be helpful. There's a player's name we haven't said, Will, and this is the second podcast in a row where I think a lot of discussion of Pacers young players that's just overlooked this guy completely. Chris Duarte is a guy who I would like to see his decision-making in these games, because he, for all the things I think he's good at, I still think he projects to be, despite it not happening at all this year, a very good shooter. I don't know about the rest of his offensive game, but the shooting I think is going to be great. Has struggled to fit in with the much faster style of this year, whereas last year, slower, more methodical. He was all rookie dude, like was one of their best players in the first 2 months of the season. That hasn't materialized this year. I don't know what his health status is, right? He only has played 5 minutes total in their last, 7 games now. But if he can get some reps out there and show a little bit of that quick decision-making, I think that would go a hugely long way for him, because that's been one of the things that's kind of hurt him in terms of fitting in this year.
I would love to see him, if Buddy Hield coming off the bench is a real thing, which I hope it is. I think Buddy Hield's sixth-man assassin is just his ultimate role. I think that's what he should be. I would love to see Duarte next to him, because I think Mathurin came in and took exactly what Duarte did. That was his exact role on offense on the second unit, and Duarte just looked lost at the beginning of the year, and then he got hurt. Obviously, injuries are a concern. This is 2 years now that have been plagued by injuries. But if Mathurin's going to be the starter, then absolutely let's get Duarte some minutes next to a guy who wants to catch and shoot, versus Duarte who wants to run some pick and rolls and he wants to have some meandering drives and do some stuff with the ball. I think he just really hasn't had that opportunity playing alongside Mathurin, and that's a problem for the future. Obviously, 2 back-to-back picks, your 13th pick and your 6th pick, I think you need them to be able to play together. That's a problem if they can't coexist well. But I think he would fit better next to Buddy. I think we may get a chance to see that if he's healthy.
I'll steal a line from one of your old articles. A good problem to have is still a problem, right? Like if those guys can't coexist, like they're both young and kind of talented, but like that's still something you have to solve. And so I agree with you that would be interesting to explore with Duarte. Like, remember, it's really, this season's been crazy with guys in and out and all this stuff, but like Duarte started for them to start the season. Like they had faith in his ability to add from year one, and that hasn't quite happened yet. And there's a chance here, if they trend a little younger down the stretch, to finally put for to have him put a little stamp on some identity stuff. Or like his March pre-injury was good. Like he was playing good this month specifically before getting hurt in a way that I was like, oh, interesting. And then got hurt again. Really tough season on the injury front for him. One more break here, guys, so I can talk to you about FanDuel tournament heating up. Final Four coming in soon. There's no better place to get in on that action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up today to claim your no-sweat first bet. Then you can wager on everything from the money line to point spreads to which team will be cutting down the net in Houston on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So don't miss your shot at a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockdown to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Always talk about who the Pacers play because the games have to matter, even if the Pacers' results are not necessarily the most important thing at this stage. I just did something on the Bucks with Brendan King like a week and a half ago, talking about the inability to defend Giannis and what that means for the Pacers team building. So we'll go the other direction of the team building part for the Bucks. They were always pretty good in those late Giannis years when he was ascending and becoming an All-NBA dude, and the Bucks couldn't get over the second round hump. And then they traded what was at the time perceived to be a lot of stuff for Jrue Holiday. And that worked out great for them. Obviously, he's been an all-star for them, and they won a championship, and they're a contender to do it again. And if Chris Middleton doesn't get hurt last year, hey, maybe they've won 2 in a row. And that got me thinking, such a trade is always important for teams in their life cycle. The Hawks tried to do it last summer. That was too early. Some teams try to do it too late. Maybe the Blazers with CJ McCollum, although that's a little different. When you look at the Pacers, they have a lot of young guys and draft equity, and who knows what that'll look like even 4 months from now. But they could be a team in a position to at some point do something like that. Let's trade for a very good player to pair with Halliburton plus Mathurin or Halliburton plus whoever. When do you feel right now? It's late to say, but we're in the business of making predictions with 7 games left here, 6 games left here. When would you say would be the best time for the Pacers to make that sort of venture, given what we know right now?
Yeah, I look at it in kind of 2 different ways. Obviously, in Indiana, it kind of like in Milwaukee, you may not get the opportunities that other teams get. You may not get guys who are willing to say, yeah, I'll resign there. Yeah, I'll be happy to be there, to stay there, to grow there. So part of this comes down to opportunity. They may not be able to make the perfectly timed move if something presents itself. They have the cap space. Obviously, Halliburton is not getting paid commensurate to who he is right now. That is a window that they have the opportunity to take advantage of. Ideally, I would think not next year, but maybe the following, depending on Mathurin's progress. If you see Mathurin in the starting lineup and he's this 18 to 20 point a game scorer and he's doing it with relative efficiency, if he maintains the free throw numbers and his 3-point shooting is pretty decent and he's doing okay as a starter, I think that's when you can start to look at that and really look for a wing, a forward, somebody who's 6'7" to 6'9". It's tough, obviously, because the whole NBA is looking for those guys.
Yep.
Maybe somebody like a Paul George will come available.
Oh boy. Yeah, look, if it's someone that talented, the timing doesn't matter. Like you just do it when it happens. But ideally, a couple things are the case. Like one, they'd have to know they're good enough to do that, right? Like it's hard to project when they'll have made the second round or even the conference finals once or twice to go, okay, we need another dude, right? That they're not even a playoff bound team yet. So it's really tough to make that prediction. That said, it sort of seems naturally like playoffs next year, maybe win around the year after, that you're looking at 2024, 25 is like the first year of that. So maybe 2025 range, 2 years from now, 3 years from now is when you start to have these conversations. In terms of the winning cycle, the actual growth cycle of the team, maybe they get ahead of schedule. They're already ahead of schedule, theoretically. But in general, that would make sense to me. The other factor that makes some sense to me is contractually, right? You can't just trade for Jrue Holiday. You have to send away Eric Bledsoe, and I forget what else was in that. There was other stuff. Mirotic, maybe? I think Mirotic was another. 2 years now, Miles Turner will be in the final year of his deal. Chris Duarte will be in the final year of his deal. Isaiah Jackson will, and like none of them could be on the team by then either. The NBA changes so fast. The Pacers are early in this team building project, but in general, contractually, it also kind of lines up that like 2025, 2026 range would be about the time to sniff something like this out. So intuitively, that kind of range is what makes sense to me. If I had to just like pick a date this second or pick a year or whatever, the trouble is that the success has to come first, right? You can't jump the gun, and that's why it's hard to say. You have to see the results first, and that hasn't happened yet.
Right. Obviously, the team with Halliburton and Turner, like you said earlier, they had a winning record. They were a winning basketball team when both of them played. I think it is plenty conceivable that could continue, given that they're going to have pretty much anybody they want back next year. And they're going to have a good draft pick and a couple of not so good draft picks that they could do stuff with. Maybe they find another Nemhard, or maybe they package some and get something for it. You never know. But I would kind of rather see them move early than late. I think that Halliburton is going to – I think we're going to be having that Supermax discussion that we had years ago about Paul George. I think that's going to come around for Halliburton. And if the team doesn't have a sustained track record of winning already at that point, it's going to be really hard for the Simons to give him that contract. So I would rather see them move maybe a year early and put the team in a winning situation with the understanding that it still needs a 2 or 3 year growth plan. And that's fraught with peril. Obviously, we've seen that go wrong in New Orleans twice now, not just once. I don't want them to empty the coffers and cash in everything. Please, no Rudy Gobert trade. Let's stay out of that. But I would rather see them make some kind of move earlier than later. If we're not going to be able to time it perfectly, I would lean earlier.
It's never perfect, right? Like, you can plan all you want, but you can't decide when someone's available. Yeah, I think Halliburton's contract's a big part of this too, right? Like this summer, I think it's easy. Like you just hand him the 5-year max and hope he signs it. And then he'll say, well, I think I'm going to make all NBA. So I want the boosted rookie max. And they'll say, yeah, let's talk about this. And you probably still do it anyway because he's amazing. But, after that, then once he hits year 7, I believe is the first year, like if he makes all NBA, the question immediately becomes Supermax, right? And that's 4 years out. But we just talked about the trade potentially being 3 or 2 years away, right? So, that's only 1 or 2 years of overlap. And that's not a hugely massive window for anything to happen. So you never know what can happen. The NBA is ridiculous right now in terms of how quickly, eras and teams and players move on. Like the Brooklyn Nets trio era started and ended in like a calendar year, basically. So all this stuff, it can happen so fast. You have to think that way as well. And he's so good that he's a blank checkbook level of talent. It looks like he's going to be. So maybe it's just easy and you're willing to pay him every step of the way. And that lets you have more time. But yeah, you have to be cost conscious all the time. And the new CBA is certainly also a wrinkle that will make this a little more difficult too. Like, will any player even have a lot of time left on their deal along the way? That is projected to be 2025 as well. I'm just saying that year keeps standing out to me. So we'll see. But in that range is when I feel like if this team ascends like it looks like they could, that would be about the time to strike and try to do what the Bucks did with Jrue and finally get over the top.
Yeah, I agree. I think 25 would be a good year.
25, 26-ish. That sounds so far away. I can't believe that that's not far away. Like that is equally far away to 2020, which is just stupid to say.
Everything since 2020 has just been a year.
Yeah, not even a year, right? Less than a year. It's weird. Yeah, it's just weird. Like every March, I'm like, man, March of 2020 was so recent. It's so weird. I'm like, nope, that was a long time ago. Thank you, Will, for the time. I like these kind of discussions late in the season, pinpointing all sorts of future-y stuff and topics about other teams that are relevant to the Pacers. Where can people follow you and your Pacers musings as the season winds down?
Absolutely, man. You can follow me at Will Furr, NBA. That's Furr. I haven't been on Twitter a lot lately. Me and Twitter have had some objections, but I do still muse about the Pacers there. I love talking about them, and I'm happy to be on, man. Thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure. We'll have to talk about Matherin in the summer. We've talked about having a Matherin conversation before, but could not get to it today. Tomorrow, we'll, of course, be talking whatever happened in Pacers Bucks. Big story from the game and potentially some Mad Ant stuff, depending on if they win their playoff game or not. Trevelin Queen, Pacers two-way guard, is suspended for tonight's game, so we'll see how they ultimately end up doing. We'll see how that goes. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening. Have a fantastic day. We will see you tomorrow.